In this video, we'll be filling in the 2026 electoral map for the 36 governor races that will be on the ballot later this year, and we'll be basing it on the latest polling averages. We have a ton of new data from key states, especially Michigan, where Republicans are on track to flip the governorship, and Ohio, where Vivek Ramaswamy is on track to win political office for the very first time. And so we'll begin on the West Coast, starting off in Oregon, where we do not have any polling data yet. However, incumbent Democratic Governor Tina Kotek is on track to win a second term after barely winning her first in 2022, defeating Republican Christine Drazan by just a lean margin. But in her bid for a second term, she will likely win by just over 5%. Next up, in Nevada, we have one of the most shocking victories for Republicans from 2022, and that was Joe Lombardo defeating the incumbent Democrat Steve Sisolak by 1.5%. Now Lombardo is running for re-election to a second term, and his Democratic challenger will be Aaron Ford, the Nevada Attorney General. And according to our polling average, the incumbent Republican leads by 1.5%, the exact same margin that he won by nearly 4 years ago. And so Nevada will be a highly competitive state, but it will be lean Republican on our map, with the GOP at a slight advantage. And then in the largest state in the country by population, California runs its primaries a little bit differently. Instead of one primary for each party, they just have one big primary in June, and then the top two candidates advance to the general election in November. And according to the polling so far, Republican Steve Hilton is at the top of the pack. He's leading Democrat Katie Porter by 2%. However, we haven't gotten too many polls since Eric Swalwell, a representative from California, entered the race a few months ago, and according to the market odds on Kalshi, Swalwell is actually the favorite to win the governorship and succeed Gavin Newsom. You might remember that Swalwell ran in the 2020 Democratic primary. He didn't make it too far, but in California, he is relatively popular, and if we look at the polling data and add up the support for all of the Democrats and compare that to support for all the Republicans, Democrats are ahead by just over 15%. And so California will be solid blue. A Democrat is expected to succeed Newsom. Arizona, though, will be significantly more competitive as Katie Hobbs fights for a second term after being very narrowly elected in 2022, defeating Kari Lake by less than 1%. Kari Lake was a poor choice on the Republican side, and that is the only reason why Hobbs ended up winning. She was not a spectacular candidate, and this time against Andy Biggs, a current member of Congress, he is a much better candidate for Republicans to nominate, and so this race will be closer than it was last time. Democrats lead by 2.2% in the polls, but ultimately the margin will definitely be smaller. Arizona will be one of the most competitive states in the country, especially after Donald Trump won it by nearly 6 points against Kamala Harris. But based on the polling data alone, the state will be placed into the lean blue category, at least for now. And then for these states in the middle of the country, we're probably not going to get much polling data for quite a while. They're simply not very competitive, so we do actually know who is very likely to win. In Colorado, it's likely going to be Michael Bennet, the incumbent Democratic senator, who has been in the upper chamber of Congress since 2009. He is now running for governor and will very likely succeed Jared Polis, but probably not by over 15%. In New Mexico, it'll likely be the former Interior Secretary Deb Haaland. She served for 4 years under President Biden and is forecasted to become the next governor of New Mexico, also by less than 15 points. And then in Idaho, Wyoming, South Dakota, and Nebraska, all 4 states will be safe Republican. In Idaho, it'll be Brad Little. The incumbent Republican is on track to win a third term. In Wyoming, Megan Degenfelder is on track to succeed Mark Gordon. And then in South Dakota, it'll likely be Dusty Johnson. He's the frontrunner for the Republican nomination and a current member of Congress. And then in Nebraska, Jim Pillen is on track to win a second term after winning his first in 2022. And so in Idaho and Nebraska, the incumbent governors will be re-elected, while we will get new governors in Wyoming and South Dakota, but these 4 states will all go to the GOP by 15 points or more. Kansas, though, will be a bit more competitive as the state currently has a Democratic governor, that being Laura Kelly. Laura Kelly was first elected in 2018 after she defeated Chris Kobach by 5 points. It was a very contentious election, and Republicans should not have chosen Kobach as their candidate. And in the primary, Kobach actually defeated Jeff Collier, who was the governor at the time. Collier took over after the previous governor became an ambassador in the Trump administration, but this time Collier is trying to win his old job back, and he will likely become the Republican nominee, and he will likely be elected the next governor of Kansas. It probably won't be by a solid margin, though, as according to the market odds on Kalshi, Republicans do have a 75% chance of winning, but considering that they have just been governed for 8 years by a relatively popular incumbent Democrat, the state will probably not vote red by more than 15 points, and so Kansas will be Republican, but it will only be placed into the likely column. This will still be, though, the first flip on the map. Kansas will go from blue to red. It's the first flip on the map for the GOP, and there are at least a few others that we'll see later on in this video. Moving on to neighboring Oklahoma, it'll be a pretty standard, solid Republican victory in a solid Republican state. Gentner Drummond, the Oklahoma Attorney General, is on track to win the Republican primary and succeed Kevin Stitt, and so Oklahoma will be safe red. Meanwhile, in Texas, incumbent Republican Greg Abbott is now running for an unprecedented 4th term. No governor of the Lone Star State has ever served more than 3, but he remains relatively popular in his home state and leads his Democratic challenger by 8 points. It'll be another victory for Abbott in Texas. The state will be likely Republican. And then to get the entirety of the left side of the map out of the way, we're going to fill in Alaska and Hawaii. In Alaska, we have, just like California, a slightly different primary system, but this time, instead of the top 2 candidates, it'll be the top 4. And the 2 frontrunners from each party are Tom Begich and Nancy Dahlstrom. Tom Begich is the former minority leader of the Alaska State Senate and is, of course, part of the very popular Begich family in Alaska. And then Dahlstrom is the current lieutenant governor, serving under Mike Dunleavy. And according to the polls, in a head-to-head between Nancy Dahlstrom and Tom Begich, Republicans are ahead by 12 points. Alaska will likely elect another Republican governor. The Senate race, though, will be much closer, as of course Mary Peltola has recently announced that she will be running to challenge incumbent Senator Dan Sullivan. And then in Hawaii, it'll be a solid Democratic victory, with Josh Green on track to win a 2nd term after he succeeded David Ige in 2023. And then moving on up to the Midwest, we have a ton of highly competitive races here, but we'll begin in Minnesota, where incumbent Democrat Tim Walz is no longer running for re-election. He previously announced that he would seek a 3rd term, but he is no longer doing that, and a big reason for that is the fraud scandal that is currently ongoing in his state with the child care centers misusing federal funds. And so Tim Walz has dropped out. He'll be replaced by another Democrat on the ticket. We still don't know who that Democrat is going to be, as of course, with the news of him dropping out, we now have a very competitive primary field. On the Republican side, though, it's likely to be Scott Jensen, who did run for governor against Walz in 2022. We do not have any polling with any of the other Democratic candidates that are now vying for the nomination, but we do have an older poll between Walz and Jensen, and it did show Walz leading by 5 points, and for now, that's all we have to work with. And so based on the data alone, Minnesota will be likely blue, but with the fact that we do not have an incumbent running, the state will likely be a bit closer. Down in Iowa, incumbent Republican Kim Reynolds is ineligible to seek re-election, and so she will be replaced by Randy Feenstra, a current member of Congress. Iowa will probably be a likely Republican state. Meanwhile, in Wisconsin, we have a pretty competitive race going on here to succeed Tony Evers, who was very narrowly elected in 2018 and then re-elected in 2022. He was actually expected to lose to Tim Michels, but he ultimately won by just over 3 points. And so he is now not choosing to run for a 3rd term, even though he technically could. And so instead, Democrats will nominate Mandela Barnes, the lieutenant governor, who just lost the Senate race to Ron Johnson a few years ago by less than 1%. Republicans will go with Tom Tiffany. He's the current frontrunner, and he is a current member of Congress. And according to the only poll we have so far between the two candidates, Democrats are ahead by 6 points, and so based on the data, Wisconsin will be likely blue, but this race will likely get much closer, as of course Wisconsin is one of the 7 swing states that Trump carried in 2024, defeating Kamala Harris by nearly 9/10 of a percentage point. The state will be extremely competitive once again, and so Wisconsin will be likely blue, but it probably will not vote for either candidate by more than 5 points. Illinois will, of course, re-elect J.B. Pritzker. He is now running for a 3rd term in office. He was first elected back in 2018, and he likely does have presidential aspirations. He is probably going to run in the 2028 Democratic primary. In order to do that, he will have to win his bid for a 3rd term, and he very likely will. He leads Darren Bailey, the Republican frontrunner, by 20 points. Illinois will be solid blue on our map. Next up, in Michigan, we have what will probably be the second most likely flip for Republicans on the map, as John James just keeps doing better and better. The incumbent governor is, of course, Gretchen Whitmer, who will be term limited after winning her re-election in 2022 by a double-digit margin. The race this time, though, will be significantly more competitive, as Democrats are on track to nominate Jocelyn Benson, the Michigan Secretary of State, and Republicans will, of course, go with John James, a current member of Congress. And according to the polling, James leads by 2.6%. We also do have an independent in this race, that being Mike Dugan. He's probably going to win a 1/5 of the vote, but he's very unlikely to win the race overall. And so the last time we looked at the polling data, Republicans were ahead by 0.2. They just took the lead. Now they're doing even better. And if we look at all the polls that have been conducted thus far, Democrats were off to a good start, with Benson leading James by 12 points in the first survey that was conducted. But in all 4 of the 4 most recent polls that we've seen, the GOP has been ahead, with James leading by 6 points in a poll that came out in late November. And so Republicans are in a very good position in Michigan to flip the governorship. And so on our map, the state will be lean red, as James leads Benson by just under 3%. Next up, in Ohio, we have a state that shouldn't be as close as it currently is, as it is generally a likely Republican state on the presidential map, but according to the polling data between Amy Acton and Vivek Ramaswamy, Republicans are ahead by just 2.6%. Amy Acton is relatively popular in the state. She was the former director of the Ohio Department of Health. Meanwhile, Ramaswamy is, of course, a billionaire businessman who ran in the 2024 Republican primary. That's where he became well known, and now he is trying to run for the governorship of his home state. And so Ramaswamy ultimately is likely to win. According to the market odds on Kalshi, he has a 60% chance of being elected Ohio's next governor, succeeding Mike DeWine. And the state is probably going to vote for Republicans by a larger margin than people expect. Of course, Trump carried it by nearly 13 points in 2024. And even in 2020, there were polls that showed that Joe Biden would win the Buckeye State. Ultimately, he lost it by 8 points. And add on the fact that Mike DeWine won his re-election in 2022 by 25 points. And you can tell that Ohio is very unlikely to elect a Democratic governor. The state will be lean red on our map, but in the end, Ramaswamy can win by much more than 5%. And then to finish off the Midwest, Pennsylvania is not going to be as exciting as it generally is. The state is almost always very close in presidential races, but on the gubernatorial level, they tend to really like their incumbents. That's what we saw in 2018 with the re-election of Tom Wolf. And then in 2022, Josh Shapiro was elected governor of the Keystone State. He is also another top contender for the 2028 Democratic primary. But first, of course, he has to win his re-election, and he leads Stacey Garrity, the presumptive Republican nominee, by 17 points. And given Pennsylvania's history of re-electing its incumbents, Shapiro is very likely to win. Pennsylvania will be solid blue. And then just to get Maryland out of the way, we recently got an announcement that Larry Hogan, the former governor, will not be running for the governorship. He did publicly express interest in it a few weeks back, but he has decided that he will not be running for political office this cycle after losing his Senate race to Angela Ulster-Brooks in 2024 by 12 points, which was still a pretty good margin. Larry Hogan is the former governor. He's pretty popular, and the only reason he's losing is because he's a Republican in a state that voted for Kamala Harris by nearly 30%. And so Wes Moore, with Larry Hogan out of the picture, is on track to win a second term, and he will probably win by more than 15%. although the polls currently show an 11-point margin, but with Hogan out of the race, no Republican is going to get within 15 points of more, and so the state will be safe blue. Up in New York, we have another expected Democratic win. This time, it's Kathy Hochul running against Bruce Blakeman, the Nassau County executive. And so Kathy Hochul leads Blakeman by just under 17 points. We got an announcement a few weeks ago that Elise Stefanik would not be running for the governorship. She was probably the most viable Republican candidate, but now Trump has put his support behind Blakeman, who will be the Republican nominee. And in the end, Kathy Hochul is likely to win a second full term, despite being extremely unpopular. The only reason she's winning here is just because of how liberal New York is, even though she only became governor after the resignation of Cuomo and barely won in 2022 when she defeated Lee Zeldin by just 6 points. This was a terrible margin, and it was actually a sign of things to come in 2024 when Kamala Harris won New York by just 12 points after Joe Biden won it by double that margin 4 years prior. And so in her bid for a second full term, Kathy Hochul will probably do better, and according to the polling data thus far, New York is likely to be a safe Democratic stronghold once again. Moving on now to New England, Vermont Governor Phil Scott is on track to win a 5th term. Governors in Vermont and New Hampshire are elected every 2 years, and even though they're pretty liberal, especially Vermont on the presidential level, they do like to elect Republican governors. And so Phil Scott, who was reelected in 2024 by 51 points, is going to win a 5th term, so the state will be solid red. New Hampshire will also be red, but it will be a bit closer. Kelly Ayotte, the new Republican governor who was just elected last year, is on track to win a 2nd term, but it will be a little bit closer. She's ahead by 3 points. She won by 9 in 2024. Ultimately, she'll win by somewhere around 3 to 9, but it will no doubt be a Republican victory. The Granite State will be lean red. And then the 4 remaining states in New England will likely go blue, starting off with Maine, where Hannah Pingree is on track to succeed Janet Mills, who is actually going to challenge Susan Collins for her Senate seat in 2026. And so Pingree is the former Speaker of the Maine House of Representatives over a decade ago. And so she is trying to get back into politics, and she is the current favorite to become the next governor of Maine. It'll be likely for the Democrats. In Massachusetts, Maura Healey is on track to win a 2nd term against Brian Shortsleeve. The state will be solid blue. Massachusetts is one of the bluest states in the country. In Connecticut, Ned Lamont is not popular, but also just because of how liberal the state is, he is still on track to win by a likely 8-point margin. And finally, in Rhode Island, the incumbent is actually Dan McKee, who was reelected in 2022, but he is so unpopular in the state and within his own party that he will likely be primaried and replaced by Helena Folks, a businesswoman who will likely become the next governor of Rhode Island, and the state will also be placed into the likely blue category. And finally, we're going to finish off the video down south, where in Arkansas, Sarah Huckabee Sanders, Trump's former press secretary, is on track to win a 2nd term. The state will be solid red. Tennessee will also be safe for the Republicans, as Senator Marsha Blackburn is now seeking the governorship. She leads by 21 points in the polls. The race is not going to be close. In Alabama, we actually have a pretty interesting race between 2 senators. It's actually former Senator Doug Jones, who was elected in 2018, basically in a fluke election against Roy Moore, who was a terrible candidate on the Republican side. He then lost to Tommy Tuberville in 2020. Tuberville is now seeking the governorship after just 1 term in the upper chamber of Congress. He leads by 19 points. Alabama will also be solid Republican. And then in Georgia, we have the last competitive state that we do not yet have polling data for, which is unfortunate as Brian Kemp is now term limited, which means that Georgia's race will actually be pretty close. It'll likely be a matchup between Burt Jones, the lieutenant governor, and Keisha Lance Bottoms, a former advisor to President Biden, and before that, she was the mayor of Atlanta. But for now, Republicans are more likely than not to win this race. If we look at Kemp's 2022 margin, it's pretty clear to see that Republicans are the favorites. Kemp was reelected as the Republican incumbent by nearly 8 points. And of course, in 2024, Trump won Georgia back, defeating Kamala Harris by 2 points. And so Georgia, as always, will be competitive, but Republicans do have a slight edge. And without any polling data, we're going to place the Peach State into the lean Republican category. Next up, just to get South Carolina out of the way, it'll be Alan Wilson, the South Carolina Attorney General. who has been in that position for over a decade now. He will likely replace Henry McMaster, and so South Carolina will be solid red. And then finally, in Florida, this state is no longer close. Florida used to be one of the most competitive states in the country. I mean, in 2018, when Ron DeSantis won his first term, it was by less than 0.4 of a percentage point. It was the only tilt state on the 2018 gubernatorial map. Fast forward 4 years, in 2022, Ron DeSantis won his re-election by nearly 20. And so Republicans are probably not going to win by a 20-point margin in 2026, but they are no doubt going to win. Byron Donalds is the presumptive Republican nominee. He's a current member of Congress, and he leads David Jolly by nearly 6 points. In 2024, on the presidential level, Donald Trump carried the Sunshine State by a double-digit margin, just like DeSantis 2 years prior. According to the betting markets on Kalshi, Republicans have a staggering 88% chance of winning the governorship. Ron DeSantis is not going to be succeeded by a Democrat, and based on the polling data, Florida will be likely red. And so that is it. According to the polling data, Republicans are on track to win 28 of the 50 governorships in 2026. It's a very strong performance for Republicans. They're on track to flip both Kansas and Michigan. Democrats are not on track to flip any governorship right now, and they're only on track to win at 22 when all is said and done. Thank you guys so much for watching. Make sure you like this video down below if you enjoyed it. Comment down below which governor races you're watching, and make sure you subscribe to the channel for more content just like this leading up to the midterms later this year.